As we recognize that hypertension rates locally and regionally have for years been on an increase, we welcome back General Practitioner Dr. Nogen Wilson to share details on hypertension. Dr. Nogen, welcome to Good Morning SKN.
Welcome back.
Good morning, and thank you for having me once again. And so we're going to have a conversation on hypertension, commonly known as high blood pressure.
Okay, so let's dive into it a little bit. Tell us, what is hypertension and why is it referred to as the silent killer?
Hypertension, medically, we normally recognize an average blood pressure to be just about 120 millimeters of mercury on your top figure, which is also called a systolic blood pressure. Okay. And the systolic blood pressure is actually when the heart drives a beat and pushes blood into the circulatory system. And the bottom pressure, usually we accept an average of just about 80 millimeters of mercury. And that diastolic pressure is when the heart relaxes and takes in some blood. So that pressure should actually be lower. So usually you would hear something over something. Now, if that blood pressure, the systolic being the top pressure, gets to 140 or more, you are considered to be hypertensive. If the bottom pressure or the diastolic gets to 90 or higher, then you are considered also to be hypertensive. Now, picture your circulatory system as a closed circuit, which is designed to accommodate a certain amount of fluid. Usually, the average adult has just about 5 liters of blood, give or take a half a liter, so you can be 4.5 to 5.5. So, if the system is designed to handle that amount of blood, it is structured that way. If for some reason we reduced the space in that system, but the amount of blood continues to be the same, then your pressure goes up. It puts more pressure on the walls of the artery. So you get high blood pressure.
I see.
Now, what happens and why high blood pressure is so dangerous? Because of that increased pressure in the circulatory system or on the artery walls, it simply means that something might just rupture, creating damage in some organs.
And as the saying goes, pressure bust pipe.
Exactly. Pressure bust pipe.
Indeed.
And so sometimes you would hear of the occasional, or someone had a stroke, they had a bleed in the brain. And that's because there was an excessive amount of pressure on a particular artery. You get a stroke. So that's a complication of high blood pressure. Same thing can occur in the heart. Now, exactly how do we arrive at having a smaller space for the same amount of blood? You often hear that, you must stay away from grease. There is the chances of you getting cholesterol and so forth. Now, what happens exactly? Inside of your blood vessels, normally everyone just refers to blood vessels as veins. We do have several types of blood vessels: arteries, veins, venules, arterioles, etc. Now, what happens? When grease accumulates inside of the blood vessels, and picture what you call hard water in a regular plumbing system, where there's calcification building up on the inside. Same thing happens when you have an excessive amount of grease. That grease builds up on the inside, it hardens, and it creates less space for the same amount of blood.
I see.
Pressure goes up. And so that is why we discourage the consumption or the use of grease or any oils in your foods. Now, there's good and there's bad, but as a general practice, just try to avoid
stay away from
the grease.
So, Dr. Wilson, let's talk about the team. Measure your blood pressure accurately, control it, live longer.
Yes. Now, measure your blood pressure accurately. Nowadays, we find that many persons have access to digital blood pressure machines, and they use them quite often. My observations, and they will tell you in the business of medicine, a lot of these machines are actually inaccurate.
Inaccurate, you said?
Yes.
Wow.
Many, if there are disturbances within the environment or the body, you can actually get a wrong reading. So when you're using a digital machine, you first have to be very relaxed, and you basically have to try to avoid moving at all.
Prior to taking the pressure?
While you're taking the pressure. Prior to taking, you try to relax. And then when you're actually in the process of taking the blood pressure, then you need to avoid moving, because simply movement in the body or twitching can actually give you a wrong reading. And so it is actually better to use the analog machines. For us here in the Federation, we have access to many health centers and professionals who understand how to use those particular types of machine.
The analog ones?
The analog.
Okay, just want the public to get it clear.
Yes. It's not to say that all digital machines would give you a wrong reading, because you would get more or less within a particular range.
Okay.
But when there is a healthcare professional who is actually listening and feeling, then for sure, well, that is it.
Okay.
You know, of course, there's human error, but
like how you put that.
Right. So a digital machine might be wrong, but there's also the chances of human error. So, but usually our professionals are trained to take blood pressures. That's one of the first things, you know, many of our healthcare professionals learn to do: take a blood pressure, because blood pressure has so many complications. It is important for us to all learn it and take it accurately.
Okay.
So usually when you use a digital machine, you should take at least 3 readings, just to see.
3 readings consecutively, or take a break and then go back?
Take a break, go again.
Okay.
Usually the pressure fluctuates based on emotions or physical stress, etc.
Okay.
So that is why it's important to just try to relax.
Okay.
And it is recommended the first reading, you could probably discard it on a digital machine and go again and see what you get. So if you're using a digital apparatus, you basically should go for at least 3 readings and look at the 2 that comes closest.
The time between those 3 readings?
No, at least 5 minutes.
Okay.
First of all, before you take your blood pressure, you should actually be seated and relax for 5 minutes. Okay. At least. Okay. You should not have had coffee, nor should you have been smoking. If you the same, if you had alcoholic beverages, you can assume that your pressure would be elevated. So usually it's a good idea to take it, you know, when you're fresh at mornings, you have not yet had your coffee and you have not had a smoke or a drink. Okay, so it is important, and also important to note that as the day go by and you're building up your stresses of the day, chances are your blood pressure would also be elevated. So you are likely to get a higher blood pressure reading at the end of your workday.
The beginning of the day. Okay, understood.
Right.
So, Dr. Wilson, there is a difference between signs and symptoms. Can you share with us some of the signs and symptoms of hypertension?
Yes. What I would tell you, and I sort of expected you to ask about this. I want us to get to the bottom line, because for the most part, high blood pressure will neither give you a sign or symptom.
It doesn't. That's why it's called a silent killer. But then how would you know?
That is why it is so important to just take an annual check. Everyone.
So go to the doctor.
Go to the doctor.
Or the health center.
And just check your blood pressure.
I see.
So where high blood pressure is concerned, signs and symptoms
normally exist.
Don't really look for it.
But then, Dr. Wilson, after I found out that I have blood pressure, right? Or after I find out I have blood pressure, now when my pressure is high, I feel dizzy, I feel all that. So how come I get those symptoms then, but then I don't have any symptoms before? That's the confusion for me.
Yes, because you are developing complications of the high blood pressure.
Wow.
Now, what happens? Most of us, for example, in the black race, we tolerate higher pressures than persons of Caucasian.
Okay.
So we can tolerate higher blood pressures, but it's not to say that we should just allow it to go high. Now, one of the things that you have to understand, your blood pressure gets elevated there is a problem with space and the volume of the blood. The heart picks up space. Okay. So chances are you will begin to feel a little tachycardic, or you would feel your heart at least racing. So it's a very big, the heart has to do it because it has to empty the chambers very quickly. Because if pressure is allowed to build in the heart, then the heart also grows in size. When the heart grows in size, there is a difficulty feeding in your muscle, and you develop a heart attack. Consequence of high blood pressure. So we learn in consequence, stroke, consequence, high blood pressure. Then the kidney, which filters the blood, if it's coming through too fast and at a very high pressure, then there is also damage in the kidney. And that is why many persons with high blood pressure, which goes unchecked and treated, you develop kidney disease, which could eventually lead to kidney failure. You also have a heart failure, and then we can say multiple organ failure, which is almost certain to lead to a quick demise of any individual. So, don't really look for the signs and the symptoms. Just go and check your blood pressure, because if you begin to say, oh no, you would get a headache. Yes, high blood pressure can cause headaches. It can cause dizziness, it can cause blackouts. But for 70% of the persons, they would never feel anything. And that's a very high percentage. So please, the best thing to do is simply go at least once per year, have your blood pressure checked. Normally, we consider someone to be hypertensive after we have had 3 checks. They can be weeks apart, which all 3 readings give you elevated levels. So we confirm that you are actually hypertensive. Because anyone can have a moment, excited, emotional, and your blood pressure shoots up. You might just win $1 million and your pressure goes up. But we check that 3 times to confirm that it is actually a high blood pressure.
Would you know what awareness there is in St. Kitts for persons who are hypertensive, would you know what is being done on this day?
Actually, because we are in the medical profession, and yes, the health centers would, of course, the health promotion unit, they would, of course, be informing the public. They would have a program, but the thing about high blood pressure in the federation, the program is ongoing. It never stops. So there is always a moment. Every week, for instance, at the health centers, there is what you call high blood pressure clinic. So it's a constant thing. So, and I believe it's better that way, such that persons are always invited in and can at any time just go and take a check. It costs you nothing. Most communities do have a health center, or everyone is saying is would live close to a community with a health center. Just run in and ask for a blood pressure check. It's not a problem.
Run in, he says, but be calm before you take the test.
Yes, don't drink your coffee.
Don't drink your coffee.
And don't smoke. But let me share something with you. Irrespective of what you would hear about high blood pressure or hypertension, don't try to become too technical. Don't confuse yourself. If your top pressure or your systolic pressure is above 140, equal to or above it, that's high blood pressure. If it's equal to or above 90 on the bottom reading, that's high blood pressure. Now you will begin to hear about grade 1, grade 2, grade 3 high blood pressure. Doesn't matter which grade you're in. High blood pressure is high blood pressure. Let the medical professional worry about which grade and how he or she will deal with each grade. Don't worry about it. Then there is primary or essential, often called idiopathic high blood pressure. That's because we can't put our finger on a reason as to why. We know the physiological process, but we can't pinpoint for sure and say, boy, it is exactly these reasons. These are the reasons why it's really up. And in some cases, which is only 5% of the cases, high blood pressure, we can say for sure that's the direct reason. This person may have been taking a particular type of medication, for instance, contraceptives, oral, estrogen. You can say, okay, your blood pressure is elevated as a result of the medication you're taking. Or there has been a kidney condition which provoked the elevation of the blood pressure.
Wow.
Or this person has been smoking cigarette for an extended period, or this person actually has high cholesterol. So there are a few things where we can actually point out that is the specific reason as to why. And in some cases, we can reverse it, because sometimes it might be a thyroid issue, well, gland issue in the endocrine system. You may not be able to do anything, but if you control what's going on with the gland, then you control the pressure. So there are moments when we can actually pinpoint the specific cause, and we do call the ones we can't pinpoint, those are essential. It's up because it's up. We don't really know why. And then the secondary causes, it's only 5%. We can say, hey, it's you that's provoking it. So
somebody with diabetes, are they provoking the high blood pressure if they don't have it?
No, what happens is that it just so happens that because diabetes can affect your circulatory system, the vessels, it can cause some level of deterioration. Then that too, at some point in time, will contribute to hypertension. But it doesn't mean because you have diabetes that you're going to get high blood pressure.
Indeed.
We should try to control any chronic condition such that it does not lead to another condition.
So some lifestyle habit to prevent hypertension.
Okay. This is a very simple trick. Knowing that high blood pressure generally would become, or blood pressures would become elevated because there is a buildup of plaque or grease on the internal walls of your blood vessels. That's what you have to remember. So what do you do to prevent that from happening? In order to get rid of grease, you have to burn it. You burn it by doing exercise.
There you
So
That's not an easy way.
as simple as that. But the trick is, fats, grease, or cholesterols become elevated in the body when you allow it to simply by not necessarily eating or consuming oils, but consuming starches, especially when you have extended periods of rest. So if you get home at night and you decide I'm going to have a $3 bread or a $5 bread and I'm going to rest, that starch, body cannot or will not use it because you're resting. So it simply turns it into fat. Grease. That's the fat that goes into your blood vessels and it's stored. So it's better to have a salad at night, basically, or if you have salads and proteins or fiber, as opposed to having direct starch and sugars, because sugars or starches which are not utilized by the body will turn into fat, and eventually it has to put it somewhere. That goes into cholesterol. It's fat in your circulation, and eventually it sticks onto the walls, giving you less space for the same volume of blood, high blood pressure. So exercise is important, diet is important. Alcohol naturally elevates blood pressure, caffeine elevates blood pressure. So we have to, even though sometimes we may have a moment, we all have moments, you should not make it regular. And it's not to say just because you have high blood pressure and your blood pressure is controlled, yes, you can have a drink, no more than 2. I drink, not the bottle. I drink from the bottle. So simple things: dieting, exercising, and you only need to do 45 minutes of exercise daily, 4 days per week. So it's not even that difficult.
It's not
take
that
a walk,
difficult. You
go
heard it from the
swimming.
doctor first. He's telling you, listen to the doctor.
And try your best to eat light as you get into your dinner, your supper, because especially if your job is not a night job, right? You're generally going to rest. Do not allow starches to turn into fat, develop cholesterol, develop high blood pressure. Do not allow it, because the complications are continuous. You get strokes, heart attack, heart failure, kidney disease, eye disease, everything. It's some, and the worst thing is that you may never feel anything until you have a complication. And that is why sometimes people just suddenly die. Never know that high blood pressure was there. So we in the Federation, we have access to health centers. Please just run in, get your blood pressure checked. It's very easy. Even some of our pharmacies around the island, they will tell you, hey, have a blood pressure check.
Exactly.
It's a chronic disease. Millions of persons suffer from it, but 70% of the time you're not going to feel anything. Silent killer. Please just run in and have a check.